All right. Live stream is freezing. Don't know why. I'll keep working on trying to fix it. And fortunately, we did it just before we're going to have our special guest today. I'm welcoming Neil Garfield to the show here. Just a minute. Neil, this is C.J. Holmes. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you're taking the time to come on the show. So tell us just a little bit about yourself, if you will. And it's hard to imagine, but there might be somebody that doesn't know who you are yet, and what you've been doing, and how you can help, how the homeowners should proceed to try to help themselves and work with. How do we find attorneys to work with? Whatever it might take to stop foreclosures and keep people in their homes.
Well, a little bit about me. I started off on Wall Street as an investment banker, and I tinkered with a number of exotic instruments that were actually the predecessors of what we now call derivatives and credit default swaps and things like that. I got some conscience and left Wall Street, even though my family owned seats on the exchanges, and I became an attorney, and for the last 35 years I've been a trial lawyer.
Neil, before you proceed, can you just share with us when you said you got a conscience, what was it about what you were involved in that really troubled you?
Well, it's not anything bad about Wall Street per se, because it's like a soldier in the battlefield is supposed to shoot bullets, but it's a dangerous thing. And you hope that he's being directed properly. The goal on Wall Street is to move money and to earn money by moving money.
Right.
And there's very little in the way of actual due diligence on what the ultimate effect will be on both sides of the transaction.
Right.
The more I got to care about what was going to happen as a result of this merger or this acquisition or that financing or what have you, the less enamored I was with the Wall Street culture.
Right.
And I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that all people who work on Wall Street are evil or anything like that. They serve a very necessary function and provide liquidity for the economy. But I couldn't do it anymore.
Right. And it reminds me of that phrase, churn and burn. You know, making the money, moving the money, but not caring how it affects the other people involved in it. That's a tough attitude.
Yeah, the difference now is that the roots of this really go back to the 1960s. But the difference now is that Wall Street is no longer an intermediary for the purpose of increasing liquidity on the world stage and world economies and our domestic economy. It has made itself a principle.
Right.
And they've put their own interests far ahead of the buyers and sellers of securities. And that kind of grew out of the rejection of the repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act. But it really came out of a culture that was born in the 1960s and an arrogance that built further and further in the 1970s and 80s. 1983 there was zero in terms of credit derivatives. Now we're told there's 1.2 quadrillion dollars in credit derivatives, which
oh my goodness,
we swamp all the real money in the world 20 times over.
Exactly, exactly. You know, that is a really fascinating statement. I really appreciate you saying it because it suddenly has cleared up for me some of the, the fact is they've become a principal. They are now doing the business on Wall Street for their own profit. That makes such
Right.
sense rather than being, the intermediary, the person, the entity that works for others on a fee basis. They have their own interests in there.
And what they did with the mortgages
Right.
to get to the point of what one of your questions is that they diverted the money from the investors
Right.
from the so-called trust that was supposed to get it to their own accounts, and then took out money for profits and fees and things like that, and then used the balance to send down to a closing agent by wire transfer. And they were ignoring their own documents and ignoring
Right.
the proper procedures for a loan. And then they diverted the documents from stating that the investors who put up the money were the owners to stating that they, Wall Street, were the owners, and that gave them the right to trade in securities that they didn't own,
Right.
and to say that they had an insurable interest in assets that they didn't own, which meant that when they got the insurance and they got the money from credit default swaps, the money was paid to the banks instead of the investors that
Right.
actually lost it.
Right.
And
Right.
if the money had been paid to the investors who actually lost it, then the balance that was owed to them would have been reduced, and that would reduce the amount owed from the borrowers, and we wouldn't have this argument about principal reduction. It would be already reduced because of the payments made under the bailout insurance and credit default swaps.
Right. In other words, and I've been saying now for, as long as I've been researching this, and by the way, one of the very first little videos was yours that I found, came across. It so impressed me because it was 10 minutes about how they did everything backwards. And that was my first exposure to basically what I now say is they just cheated everybody. It's an insurance scam. They cheated the investors. They cheated the borrowers. They had toxic loans. They knew were going to fail. I mean, it's just truly run amok.
Well, the big problem that we have is that in order to fix it at this point,
Yeah.
we need people like you and me to apply pressure in the court system and on the banks, because the administration, the Obama administration, just like the Bush administration before it, bought this too big to fail theory and is intentionally allowing the banks to continue carrying on their books assets which really don't belong to them, and to continue foreclosing on mortgages which they don't own and have no right to manage.
Exactly. Now, okay, you've said we need to have pressure on the courts and the banks. So how can we do that? What else can we do? Do you have any other ideas?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well, first of all, you have to be very watchful in the state legislatures to see what they're up to. The banks are very strong in lobbying the state legislatures, and they are constantly trying to propose bills that will weaken the rights of borrowers in foreclosure cases.
Right, just like what we've talked about in Washington State. Just this last week, we've had some people send us the links to the hearings. There's a bill, just like you said, it's trying to weaken the ownership rights, property rights on behalf of the banks.
Exactly, and there's a number of blog articles and even mainstream articles about how there's been bad decisions coming out of the courts. And really, sometimes the decisions are truly bad. I mean, there's for every 100 judges, probably 20% of them really, are up to date on everything. But when you go into the courtroom and you admit the debt owed to that would-be forecloser, and you admit the note,
Right.
and you admit that that's the mortgage, and you admit that you defaulted,
Right.
there's not much for the judge to do except to allow the foreclosure to go through.
Exactly.
Which is why I'm pushing what I call deny and discover, which is to deny the debt that they're alleging, because in most cases the debt is not owed by the homeowner to the party that is foreclosing.
Exactly.
And then they can deny the validity of the note and the mortgage, seek nullification of that, sue for wrongful foreclosure if it's already happened, and be as aggressive as possible. The problem being, and you mentioned it, getting a lawyer who is willing to do this. There's more and more as we go on. In 2007, when I was trying to recruit an army of lawyers, I got nowhere. 2008, the same thing, and then in 2009, things loosened up. And now there are lawyers all over the country that are at least saying that they're taking these cases. The problem that I would alert your listeners to is you don't want to switch from a predatory lender to a predatory attorney. Sure that if you're hiring an attorney, but you've got some references and things like that the guy or the woman actually goes to court, actually wins some cases, wins some hearings and things like
Exactly.
that. It's a tough road out there, but some of the people out there are simply taking a retainer and a monthly fee and doing virtually nothing.
Right.
It doesn't help the homeowner in the long run, although you can't deny the fact that living rent-free and mortgage-free for however long you get away with that is some sort of benefit. But in my view, the only real benefit that should happen is in every case of fraud, there should be restitution, which means
Yes.
that these homes should be given back, the ones that are foreclosed,
Right.
to the former owners, and these homes that are in foreclosure should be left alone, and the ones that are set for foreclosure should be left alone. And the truth is that they don't have, in my judgment, and what I've discussed with other attorneys around the country, I've come to the conclusion that the mortgage lien or the deed of trust is not a validly enforceable instrument, which means it's unsecured.
Right.
It gives you a lot more bargaining power when you're looking to modify.
Right. Exactly.
So in a nutshell, I know we don't have a lot of time. I'm trying to give you the view from 100,000 feet. Now, if you go to my website, livinglies.wordpress.com, you'll find on the left side there's a whole archive of forms that are used in litigation, which lawyers use and some pro se litigants use. I don't recommend that people go into court without at least consulting with an attorney, because procedure is what's going to kill them.
Exactly.
And they're not going to know anything about it.
Right.
So they need to have at least a short lesson if they're going to litigate themselves in court procedure from a real lawyer who knows what he's talking about, and if possible, hook up with somebody who's willing to take it on and move with it.
Right. Right. Now, I read something that you wrote just well, I think it was fairly recently, about in your interviews and research, you now feel that there was never any money that changed hands, so there was never any consideration on the part of the banks by buying these loans. Can
They
you
never
talk
did
about
buy
that?
it. The money went from the investor to the homeowner, and everything else is smoke and mirrors and intermediaries.
Right.
And if you just follow the money trail on not all cases, because there are certain institutions that were doing their own loans and then decided to get into securitization, but in
Right.
most cases, you'll find that if you follow the money trail, that's the blueprint. You know, the real transaction, the real
Right.
where money exchanged hands. That's what you would expect to find in the documents talking about that transaction.
Right.
You don't see that. You see something entirely different. And so these are, in my opinion, winnable cases if the lawyer is persistent and as relentless as these foreclosure mills.
Right, right. Okay, so the couple of things so far that we've talked about that we can fix it, because that's the whole point of my show and my effort is let's fix this, let's stop these. So watch in the state legislature, since we know that the banks are really focusing, trying to get bills passed. We've heard about it in Florida, heard about it in Washington in particular, just recently, how to speed up foreclosures or make it easier for banks, dilute property rights, dilute owner ability to fight back. And then you're saying to hook up with a foreclosure defense attorney if you can find one. Is there anything else that people could do to help bring this down?
Like anything, it's also a political movement, and
Right.
they should educate themselves. I think I have the largest blog on the internet regarding this, but there are others too. Stop Foreclosure and
Right.
a variety of other blogs addressing the issue, naked capitalism, that will educate people. You see, the problem is that, and I realized this as soon as I went out into the field and started giving seminars, the problem really is that the borrowers feel shame
Exactly.
as a result of getting into a deal that's in over their heads.
Right.
They don't realize that they're victims
Right.
of a scheme.
Right.
And feeling shameful, they wait too long before they do anything, or they feel as though, they really should be thrown out of their homes because, after all,
They didn't
it's a
pay.
legitimate debt.
That's
But
right.
it isn't a legitimate debt.
Exactly. Exactly. So how do we shift, and I'm speaking to the viewers and myself and all of us, how do we work more, if we can, to shifting that attitude from, like I said from 17 months ago, don't get sad, get mad, because you're not.
The only way that's going to happen is by doing like what we're doing right this moment.
Right.
By talking about it and at least introducing the concept
Yes.
that maybe that is not a legitimate debt. And the fact that you've got money for a loan does not mean you got it from the people who are trying to take your house.
Exactly. And basically, in the case of a securitized loan, it almost 100% means that the person foreclosing is not the one you paid or got the money from.
Exactly, nor did they pay to buy it.
Exactly. Can you explain a little more in detail how you came to that conclusion that there was never any consideration? Because every last assignment says, for beneficial interest. I mean, for consideration, I'm assigning the beneficial interest. And you're saying there's no consideration.
There isn't. Wall Street, since its inception, has been based, and even going back to England before there was a Wall Street, has been based on the use of other people's money.
Right.
In other words, you have people who, structure deals and are supposed to be intermediaries.
Right.
So the first thing you start with is that if Wall Street is involved, highly unlikely that any of their own money is involved, because they just don't do things that way.
Yeah, they make money, they don't use their money. Got it.
Exactly. I'm coming out of a Wall Street background like I do as an investment banker. You get to know, what the culture is.
Exactly.
So I started a little way up the ladder because I already knew some things. Then as I started analyzing, the document trail and the strategies that were being used by the banks, two things became obvious to me. One was that many of the documents, if not most, were being fabricated and forged.
Exactly.
I came to that conclusion before some guy called it robo-signing, which I give him credit for. That's a catchier phrase.
Well, and it's a dismissive sound. Instead of forgery, it's, it sounds like, oh, well, we had a few mistakes. And so I feel that it's been very damaging to the owners in that word.
I agree. And then when I started actually analyzing the closing documents and looking at each one of the documents, and I got to the wire transfer receipt, I found in almost every case that the wire transfer came from somebody other than the party being named on the note as the payee and the one who was lending the money.
Okay, give us an example, please. For example?
So if you had First Magnus was one of them, one of hundreds, that you thought you were doing a loan deal with, and they showed up on all the disclosure documents, and they showed up on the note, and they showed up on the mortgage or deed of trust, you would naturally assume that you were getting the money from them.
And when you say show up on the deed of trust, for example, or the mortgage, it says, because on like the first page, one of those items states the lender is, and then it would be First Magnus listed right there on that.
It says so. Why would you think otherwise if
Exactly.
you didn't know what was going on?
Okay.
And so when you look at the wire transfer receipt, you'll see that it came from some bank up north, and with specific instructions that First Magnus was not to touch the money, and that it was to be applied to closing, and if there was an overage, it should be returned to that bank and not First Magnus.
How do you get these wire transfers?
The wire transfer receipts are present at every closing. You have to ask for them.
Would we go to our title company on the closings to get that?
Yes, the closing agent. The closing agent.
How long do they keep those? Do you know? Just
I
curious.
don't know. As
Okay.
Anecdotally, I've been told that they keep them for 7 years, but
7.
I don't know, in fact, what their practices are.
If 7 years is the case, then that means everything from 2006. We ought to be able to go back into our escrow offices, our HUD statements. So I'm talking to the owners now that you're watching and all the activists.
Right.
They ought to be able to contact the escrow officer and ask to see. And what would they ask to see? What would that be called?
the wire transfer receipt and the wire transfer instructions.
The wire transfer receipt and wire transfer instructions from the lender, quote unquote, right?
From whoever they got it from.
From whoever they got.
Whoever it was that gave them the money to close, the closing agent wasn't coming up with the money to pay off the old mortgage and pay the seller and all that.
That's right.
They're getting the money from somebody. That somebody is going to be on the wire transfer receipt.
Oh, Neil, this has been so fabulous. You are telling us how to find this information, and I tell you, we've got some really potent advocates, including myself, and I do understand this because I'm a broker. I'm a real estate broker. In fact, I had an attorney just a couple days ago say, "Why are you doing this?" Thinking that it would be legal researchers and attorneys that are, more active in this activism movement. And the fact is, I've seen so many of my clients, my buyers and my sellers be so ruined and cheated and lose their properties. And it's just, it really troubles me a lot. That's why I've started to do this, because somebody's got to step up. And I kept waiting for somebody, and so I finally said, okay, I better step up. So
That's you, and others like you around the country who are keeping this alive, because you sure don't see it on TV or in the newspapers or magazines.
Well, I've had activists tell me that they've had reporters actually tell them. So it's hearsay on my part, but I don't think these people are lying. And basically, it's a blackout. The media reporters they have to get permission to write articles, and mostly this stuff is not being reported intentionally. In fact, I have joked for now a whole year saying, if I really want to know the news, because I'd actually discovered this myself, I have to go to Al Jazeera, which may sound really awful to a lot of people because of their biases and prejudices. But that's what I'm finding.
Al Jazeera is pretty good on it, and the Australian Broadcasting Company is another one that has reported accurately on it. And if you can get translations from the newspapers in Iceland.
Because Iceland did the right thing. They did the right thing. They put those banksters in prison, and they said, we're not going to play this game anymore. And
they reduced household debt.
Exactly.
To reflect the fact that these people didn't owe that money.
Exactly.
Made the banks take the hit, and
exactly.
Now they are the only economy in the Western world that is growing at a healthy rate. Their unemployment is in a nosedive. They're achieving full employment.
Exactly.
And interestingly enough, their banking sector, which we've been told under too big to fail, would collapse if we ever did that. Iceland's banking sector has never done better.
Well,
so it seems like a win-win situation,
right,
across the board if you do the right thing.
Right.
But as I think Winston Churchill said about America, he says, once America has exhausted all other alternatives, it will finally do the right thing. I'm waiting for us to exhaust all the stupid alternatives before we finally do the right thing.
Oh my goodness, I don't know if we can do that in our lifetimes. Well, this is truly one of the powers of the internet, is that at least voices like ours can actually be heard, even though we don't have a mainstream media outlet. And we can be aware of things that happen in Iceland and happen in Cyprus. And but it still feels like we're trying to turn this monstrous ship, trying to shift direction, and it feels like it takes a long time if we're not even sure we're being successful. And in the meantime, people lose their homes. This is
right.
This is
the prediction from Sheila, who's the partnership with the Case-Shiller Index.
Right.
Everybody depends upon in real estate for trends and things like that. He's predicted that it may maybe another 40 years before we recover from all this.
Oh, and see, as if you look at who really got hit, well, it's all the property owners. They're the ones that got hit. It's all the, if you will, the middle class.
The banks. The taxpayers got hit.
Yeah.
Consumers got hit generally.
Investors.
They lost jobs.
That's right.
They lost the ability to put food on their table. Some of them went into, foreclosure because they stopped earning money.
That's right.
All that stuff happened because the banks siphoned
That's right.
lifeblood out of our economy.
That's right.
And parked it overseas in the Caymans and Cyprus and
Exactly.
Bermuda and the Bahamas, etc.
And not only that, I liked what Sheila Bair said. We had her on her little interview with Bill Moyers, and she talked about the fact that as things went south, the banks had to focus on their books and on their capital reserves. And so they pulled in their horns. The trouble is when they stop lending, when we can't get credit, when a business can't get credit and a house of, a loan can't be refinanced, that directly impacts Main Street. We are hurt as victims of these banks, their issues, their own personal issues. And so, when push comes to shove, we lose. The banks work on themselves, and we're out of luck.
You're completely correct on that. And the whole deal, as it was originally agreed to orally between the banks and the Bush administration, was that the banks would immediately start lending so that, the economy would not falter. And they gave them all that money, TARP and the insurance and credit default swaps, 100 cents on the dollar for things that were worth 3 cents.
Exactly.
And all that. And the banks, instead of lending, they cut back on lending. People got notices in the mail that their credit limits were being
reduced,
frozen or reduced.
That's right.
On credit cards, on lines of credit, and things like that. They totally breached every deal that they ever made. And
now, Neil, I have a question. I have a question for you, because you said right there that they had made a verbal commitment to lending. So I have two questions. One is, why didn't they get that in writing? And if they had gotten it writing, would the banks have just said whatever and done what they did anyway, in your opinion?
I think the reason they didn't get it in writing is there wasn't time. And if they did get it in writing, I think your question is exactly correct. The banks would have done anything they wanted anyway.
Right. However, and the point is, they're faking and forging all the documents. And like I said, once a person starts down a criminal path, and fraud is very lucrative and beneficial to their personal pockets, like it has been, then where do they stop? And so you really shocked me with your first comment on today's show that the swaps, derivatives, this mess is like 1.2 quadrillion. The highest number I had heard so far was 700 trillion. So in just a few months, I mean, the whole thing is just lunacy. There's no way it's ever going to be paid. And so do you have any insight as to how this is going to blow up, and when it does, what's going to affect us, how that might happen?
Well, obviously all I've got is history to go by, and if you look back in history, there doesn't seem to be any model in which there was this type of I'll just say monkeying around with the currency and financial structure such that the conditions became mostly artificial. There's no model in history that I know of that was sustained. All those societies collapsed.
Right.
And whether that's what will happen here, I don't know. very short period of time is the extent of globalization on all types of business, including businesses that don't even realize they're being affected by it.
Right.
So while one society may have collapsed before, we're so interconnected now, it's hard to imagine how a major power like the U.S. would be able to go down, fall apart or whatever financially without taking everybody with us.
Exactly. And I think...
But if we did the right thing, which is restitution to the investors and the homeowners who got sucked into this,
right,
then money would be back in the marketplace and we wouldn't be at risk for those things.
Right. Now, I believe that the European Union obviously is showing cracks, and the Cyprus, all these other issues going on, and the fact that evidently the U.S. banks have these credit default swap derivative connections with the European banks, and the whole thing, like you said, is so interconnected. It strikes me that Europe could blow up, and we might really have some effect on that. I don't know, but I totally agree with you. I've said from the beginning, if they'd stop the foreclosures, if you have to sell the house short, sell it short to the owner, keep them in their house. That would reduce their principal. That would save the people. Then you'll save the banks and you'll save the economy. And we would not have had this drastic drop in value, because one of the reasons the prices dropped so much is because they had so much inventory. They were trying to sell everything all at once. And these are closed markets. It's not like stocks and bonds where anybody around the planet can buy them and, buy and sell and trade. Most of the home market, the real estate market, is for people that live there. And so they trade amongst themselves. So if you pull out, 100 buyers that otherwise would be buying a home because now they're bad, they lost their home to foreclosure or short sale, so now they can't buy, and you have all these homes to sell, who's going to buy them? Thus the price drops. And they've just had such a dramatic collapse of values in real estate, which is just mushroomed and affected the entire economy. It's broken the developers, they can't build, and one thing after another as you just find this whole system breaking down.
Isn't it interesting that you and I know these things and that the federal and state governments appear not to know them?
It is absolutely amazing to me. And I don't know, I don't understand it, but maybe it's what do they call that? The Peter principle or something, where a person rises to their level of incompetence. And so... Well,
I wish it were that neutral. I don't think it's that innocent at all. I think there's been... Well, Eric Holder said it when he addressed the Senate subcommittee. He was asked a question directly, and he said, that's right. We're not prosecuting the banks because we are of the opinion that if we did so, it might have a terrible effect on our society, our economy, here and around the world. So if your crime is big enough...
You can get away with it.
Yes.
Right. And, of course, all that does is breed more of it. Because the criminals say...
we're going to have more of this with that
absolutely.
Kind of a result.
And not only in the banks, but you're going to see this everywhere. It's going to be just a mushrooming. If I can be big enough, then I can be fraudulent and I can be fine. I'll make more money and I'll get away with it.
Right. I mean, and if you knew that you were going to get away with it, then if you were of a mind to do that kind of thing, you would definitely do it.
Exactly. And in fact, it was about a year ago or longer that somebody wrote an article. It's listed on my website, but it really struck me. And it was the concept that when an industry is taken over, if you will, like finance, with fraud as a business model, like toxic loans, then that pushes out all normal, honest business because they can't compete.
Right.
And so you end up with whole industries that are just completely fraud filled. And this is
I have a friend of mine who has been an observer of this, and he said, we always used to worry about one Wall Street firm or another cornering the market on oranges,
right.
and then driving it up and making a profit that way. He said they've gone to the ultimate here, where they cornered the market on money.
That's right. That's right. And it's a pump and dump scheme. They do everything they do is pump and dump. They pump it up, which is what they've done on Wall Street. You pump up the stock, and then you snag the profits, and then you dump it. And I call it shearing the sheeple. And now we've allowed them to just pump and dump, like you said. They've cornered the market on money. They've cornered the Federal Reserve, obviously. The Federal Reserve is they've got $9 trillion or whatever the last number is that they don't know where it went. They have no bookkeeping or record tracking. It's insane to watch these senators, query the Federal Reserve officials, including Bernanke, and they don't have any answers.
Well, they know the answers. They're just not telling the answers. The answer is that some $7 to $9 trillion went offshore through Bermuda, which asserted tax jurisdiction over the transaction, and then waived the taxes, and from there went all over the world. And it looks to me like there are trillions of dollars in money that belong in our domestic economy.
Right.
At a handful, and I mean really a handful of bankers control. And when you're talking about, 5 or 10 people controlling trillions of dollars,
exactly,
you're talking about an enormously powerful influence that is obviously not going to be good for you and me. They're obviously going to do things that are just good for them.
Now, do you know who these people are? You want to name them? or they control the mega banks like Chase and Citigroup? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, they seem to be at the center of it. I'm not going to tell you that I know, of a specific account somewhere.
Right.
Maybe I could find it. I don't know, but I put my mind to it. But the obvious culprits here would seem to be the ones that are controlling all that money.
Right.
Blank Fine and Diamond, etc. I mean, how you could allow somebody like Diamond to sit on the board of directors of the New York Federal Reserve
exactly
is beyond me. But that's the way it is.
Exactly. Well, the banks control the Federal Reserve anyway. And to me, the heart of the problem is the fact that this country has allowed private individuals to create credit for their interest, for themselves. They get interest on that credit creation. And rather than the creation of credit for public benefit, where the public benefits from that vehicle. And so that when you net it all down, and I often have talked about the fact that all of the paper money that we carry around with us, if you take it out and look at it, it's labeled on the very top. It says this is a Federal Reserve note. And that paper dollar, that credit creation, that money is debt. We use that as our medium of exchange, but every time they create that, there's more interest that we have to pay them. And that is the heart of it, in my opinion.
Well, I think that's a major part of it. I wish I could say, well, frankly, I wish I knew less. I wouldn't be as confused at times as I am if I knew a little bit less. Because as you scan the economic landscape, you can spot several major contributors essential one being that as a society, we've now given up our government to the banks.
Right.
And not all aspects of governing, but most of the things that matter in terms of us being able to food and shelter ourselves, to feed and shelter ourselves and clothe ourselves and so forth, are ultimately decisions made by the banks. Whether we get medical care is a decision made by the banks because they control the insurance companies.
Right.
And, it goes on and on. And if we're not willing, the example that I use is, imagine a basketball game and the referees were taken off the field and the players were told, not only are the referees off the field now, they're never coming back.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
what would you expect would happen there? Well, there'd probably be blood on the floor and all kinds
Exactly.
of things would happen.
Exactly.
And that's really what we did with the securities markets, and it was probably the worst mistake or series of mistakes we've ever made.
Right.
Because we gave up a lot of our freedoms and gave up a lot of our prospects. And for the first time, we have to seriously consider whether the next generation is truly going to do better than the one before it. It doesn't look like that's the case now.
No, I don't think so, and I don't think they will, and I think that is part of the natural and logical conclusion of selling out for money. And what's so really extra disappointing is that the campaign contributions to the elected officials is like fractions of a penny on the benefit that the banks have gotten by it. I mean, and I'm sure it's all a tax write-off because it's a contribution. And so it's just such an abuse of our system that the banks have gone through. It's really, really discouraging, and yet we're not going to stop the fight. We're not going to give up. We can change the system. We can educate the public, and I believe that getting money out of politics might be a really good effort to work towards.
Well, I would support anything in that direction. There's no question in my mind that money and politics don't mix well for a result that will benefit society.
Right.
The very fact, now, true, it's not every time that the rich man wins or the rich woman or whatever, but for the most part, money is what controls our politics.
Right.
And who controls that money? It's the banks.
And I believe there's even something more structurally at fault, because the person, I've seen this over and over, it seems as if the people that really would do well in the job, doing the job of managing the county or managing this budget or whatever that elected official position is, they don't get elected because they can't raise the money. So the slick talker, the guy that loves to be around, wine and dine and lie, is willing to talk out of 16 sides of his mouth. They get the money so then they can win. And that is really frustrating.
It is frustrating, and the whole idea that we meet people in our daily lives all over the place that would serve better in these official capacities as a public servant.
Exactly.
And they don't even run. They don't even think of running because the prospect of doing that is so daunting between the money raising and the press looking at every corner of their lives. Yes. I mean, they examine the candidates years before and that kind of stuff. An examination that none of us could survive.
Right. Right. It's brutal.
And I think that, we have to make it safe and we have to make it possible for good candidates to run.
Exactly. I totally agree. Because until we do that, we can't get these people that are already elected to change. They're already bought off. Now, maybe we can get some changes if we have a big enough political movement. Like you were talking about, this is one of the things we can do is to join together and shift the political attitude. The trouble is, that's an awful lot of work to organize, millions of people somehow and get them on the same boat, educate them, get them to agree with you, get them to push politics in their county, state for their representative. And it's such a massive task that, it struggles to succeed.
Yeah, and people are tired. They're worn out.
Exactly. They're broke.
Another thing on their plate, like something like this to get involved in, it's just too much for some people.
Exactly.
And you can't blame them. They're trying to put food on the table.
Exactly. Everybody's broke now. We've been ruined. Equity's gone. Everybody's been stretching out their savings. I mean, I get emails all the time. It just kills me. And I feel so badly because, the integrity of paying debt that you owe, that is one of the underlying principles, foundations of our system. And yet these people have been going into their retirement accounts. They've drained their savings. They've run up their credit cards just to make their loan payments because they want to keep the house. And it's awful. They email me, well, I'm going to run out of money. What should I do? Well, before you go broke, you have to be more businesslike. You have to say, okay, I can't be completely destitute and live in a tent, so I have to be more realistic. If I can't afford my mortgage, then I have to stop. And hopefully, as we can try to get more people educated, that they're not deadbeats, they're victims. And I would love to have a really good, solid solution. I'd love to have, 1 million attorneys ready to take 40 clients on each one of them, so we could have 40 million people get restitution and get out of these fraudulent loans.
You'll see a rush like that if the door opens where there's a lot of large judgments and things like that. One of the things that I've suggested, and which is frankly being done quietly around the country, is an offer, a real offer where the money's present and available to be put in the court registry, to pay the entire amount demanded by the other side if they can prove their loss and prove their payment.
Right.
Because they can't.
So how long does that process take? So you're telling me that they file some kind of a lawsuit, the owner.
What I'm saying is that if they're in foreclosure, for example,
okay,
they work out with a private investor, that the investor will put up all the money required to pay off the would-be foreclosure in the amount demanded if the would-be foreclosor can prove payment and prove the loss.
So here's a question.
If they can't, case over, and the party that put up the money gets a small mortgage from the homeowner, which is a fraction of what the original one was.
So so the owner now is filing these lawsuits. They would have to be the plaintiff and to the bank, right? The
plaintiff or defendant. It doesn't make any difference.
Okay. And so does that action actually postpone the auction? Or does the servicer continue to try to foreclose?
Because every auction has a right of redemption attached to it. So if you're offering the money on proof
that judge then remove that debt and that foreclosure, like in clearing the title?
The foreclosure will be gone.
Right.
The security is probably gone. The debt is theoretically present, but we don't know who the creditor is.
Right.
And for reasons that are too complicated to go over right here, most of the investors are not joining with borrowers because they should. They're both co-victims of the same scheme.
Right.
But they're being divide and conquer has been the way that the banks have dealt with them.
Yes.
Any strong institutional investor has gotten close to 100 cents on the dollar, whereas a weak community bank that acquired some of these mortgage bonds is going to be given, 20 or 30 cents on the dollar,
right,
told that they're lucky to get it.
Right.
It's a game. It's a game to people on Wall Street.
Wow. And they're gambling and gaming with people's lives and future and our children, and it's just truly an outrage.
Well, we can only hope that conversations like this will at least open people's eyes to the fact that there is education out there on the internet,
right,
and Living Wise and many other blogs that cover foreclosure and foreclosure defense, and that the lawyers increasingly get up to speed, and that maybe some public officials won't go along with the party line.
Right. Education, exposure. We just keep pushing. Well, Neil, I thank you so much for this conversation. This has been wonderful. I'd love to have you back on the show anytime, whenever you're free. This has really been an education, and you've really prompted some action already. One of our listeners has already given me the wiring instructions on how to get that information from your escrow. So we're going to be focused on that tomorrow. And again, I want to remind everybody that tomorrow is Update Friday. So any updates from anywhere in the country, please share them with us. We'd like to have you on the show. We love hearing about what's going on anywhere and everywhere, even if it's a disappointment, because we can learn from every one of this, and everyone that gets kicked in the stomach needs some help, and we're here to be your help and support. Thanks, Neil. We'll be closing the show now. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, you too. Well, guys, that's it for today, and we just really enjoy having you on the show, watching, joining us, and here we go with our closing song. We really love these people, and we're looking forward to tomorrow on Update Friday. Please don't forget to share that with us, and as this says, let's booger the bankers. This is CJ signing off for today.
When I was a lass, I was proud of me class, like my father and mother before me.
They taught me to fight for my civil rights.
But it's always the same old story.
The rich reign supreme while the poor can but dream.
And the Labour or Liberal or Tory.
And I say, bugger the bankers and politicians. Bugger the bureaucrats too. Bugger the buggers who make up the rules. And if you're one of them, bugger you. And if you're one of them, bugger you.
The system is bent and the money's all spent. We're banded from every direction. The
workers get taxed while the wealthy relax.
With nary a moment's reflection,
Where there's brass, there's muck.
and they don't give an arse, 'cause they're programmed against insurrection. And I say, bugger the bankers and politicians, bugger the bureaucrats too, bugger the buggers who make up the rules, and if you're one of them, bugger you, and if you're one of them, bugger you.
Now all you good people with passion to vent, don't give up the struggle for justice. But I've done my time on the protesters' line, and these days I show my dissent.